A black woman saves a blind boy lost on a stormy highway, never imagining who his father really is. She thinks she's rescued an innocent child from danger. But when the rumble of motorcycles fills her driveway, she realizes the danger is coming straight for her. These men aren't church bikers. They're Hell's Angels, led by the boy's own father, a man with fire in his eyes and a past soaked in regret. Now, caught between faith and fury, compassion and chaos, she faces a choice that could cost her everything, because saving the boy was only the beginning. What happens when the woman who believes in grace meets the man who's forgotten it? And can love redeem a soul that's ridden through hell itself? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The rain hammered against the windshield of Angela Porter's old Buick as she navigated the dark country roads of Willow Creek, Tennessee. Her wipers squeaked back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the downpour. After 16 hours of tending to patients, her eyes felt heavy, but something kept her alert, a whispered prayer for guidance that had become habit during her late drives home. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the road ahead in stark white. That's when she saw him, a small figure stumbling along the shoulder, barely visible through the curtain of rain. Angela's heart jumped into her throat. She eased off the gas, peering through the streaked glass. "Dear Lord," she whispered, pulling onto the shoulder. The headlights caught the child more clearly now. A little boy, completely soaked, clutching something to his chest. Angela grabbed her umbrella and rushed out into the storm. The wind whipped at her scrubs as she hurried toward the child. "Honey, are you all right?" she called out, her nurse's instincts taking over. The boy didn't turn toward her voice. He just stood there, shivering, his small hands wrapped around what she now saw was a worn teddy bear. As she drew closer, she noticed his vacant gaze, eyes that didn't quite focus on anything. "Daddy told me to wait for the angels," he whispered through chattering teeth. Angela's heart squeezed. She knelt beside him, holding the umbrella over them both. "I'm Angela," she said softly. "I'm a nurse. Are you hurt?" The boy's fingers tightened around his bear. "Cold," was all he said. Without hesitation, Angela shrugged off her jacket and wrapped it around his tiny shoulders. "Come with me, sweetheart. Let's get you warm and dry." She gently touched his arm, and he flinched slightly before relaxing into her guidance. "My car's right here," she explained, keeping her voice steady and calm. "I'm going to help you in, okay?" He nodded, and Angela noticed how his hands reached out uncertainly, confirming what she'd suspected. The child was blind. She helped him into the passenger seat, grabbing the emergency blanket from her trunk before getting back behind the wheel. The drive to her house took only minutes, but Angela's mind raced with questions. What was a blind child doing out alone in this weather? Where were his parents? She glanced at him, bundled in her jacket and the blanket, his bear still clutched tight. Her little white craftsman house emerged from the rainy darkness, its porch light a beacon of warmth. Angela helped the boy inside, her maternal instincts in full force. "Let's get you dried off," she said, leading him to the bathroom. She handed him a fluffy towel and some of her late husband's old t-shirts she'd never had the heart to give away. "Can you manage changing by yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied quietly. "I do it all the time." While he changed, Angela hurried to the living room and lit the wood stove, its warmth quickly filling the space. She put some chicken soup on the stove, the homemade kind she always kept frozen for emergencies. The familiar routine of caring for someone else steadied her nerves. Thunder rolled outside as the boy emerged from the bathroom, swimming in James's old t-shirt. Angela's breath caught. James had always wanted children. She pushed the thought away and guided the boy to the couch near the wood stove. "I made some soup," she said, wrapping another blanket around his shoulders. "Would you like some?" He nodded, and a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, please. I'm Eli." "Well, Eli, it's nice to meet you." Angela brought him a mug of soup, helping him wrap his hands around it. "Careful now, it's hot." As Eli sipped his soup, Angela sat beside him. The storm raged on outside, but in here, a peaceful quiet settled around them. She waited until he'd finished half the mug before asking gently, "Eli, can you tell me where your parents are?" His face fell slightly. "Daddy rides with angels," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The ones with skulls." Angela frowned, trying to make sense of his words. A church group, perhaps? Some kind of religious motorcycle club that did charity work? "And your mama?" she asked carefully. Eli's lower lip trembled. "She went to heaven last year. Daddy says she's watching over us now." Angela's heart ached. She reached out and squeezed his hand gently. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. My husband's in heaven too." Eli turned his face toward her, his unseeing eyes somehow full of understanding. "Does it still hurt?" "Sometimes," Angela admitted. "But God helps us carry on, doesn't he?" Eli nodded solemnly. "That's what Daddy says too, when he remembers to pray." The rain drummed against the windows as Angela watched this brave little boy finish his soup. She knew she should call the police, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Eli had mentioned angels, or perhaps it was the quiet strength she sensed in him, something that reminded her of James. "You must be tired," she said finally. "I have a guest room with a nice soft bed. Would you like to rest there tonight?" "Yes, please," Eli said, stifling a yawn. Will you stay close by?" "Of course I will," Angela assured him, helping him up. She led him to the guest room, which she kept ready out of habit, though no one had stayed there in years. The room still held traces of James, his old quilts, the bedside lamp he'd bought at a yard sale, the cross he'd hung on the wall. She helped Eli into bed, tucking him in with extra care. His bear sat vigilant on the pillow beside him. "Would you like me to pray with you?" she asked. Eli nodded, folding his hands atop the quilt. Angela sat on the edge of the bed and took one of his small hands in hers. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice soft but steady, "please watch over Eli tonight. Keep him safe and warm and help his daddy find his way back to him. Thank you for bringing this precious child to my door. In Jesus' name, Amen." "Amen," Eli echoed, squeezing her hand. Angela stayed until his breathing evened out in sleep, then quietly left the door ajar and returned to the living room. She sank into her favorite armchair, emotionally drained but wide awake. The storm continued outside, but inside her home, something had changed. The empty rooms felt less lonely, filled with the presence of this mysterious child who spoke of angels with skulls. She picked up her Bible from the side table, letting it fall open where it would. Her eyes landed on Matthew 25:40. "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Angela looked toward the guest room where Eli slept. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew God had put this child in her path for a reason. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with faith and compassion, just as James would have wanted. The storm began to fade, its fury spending itself against the Tennessee hills. Angela remained in her chair, keeping vigil, her prayers joining the gentle rhythm of the rain. In the guest room, Eli slept peacefully, his bear tucked under one arm, safe in the care of a woman who understood all too well what it meant to trust in angels during life's darkest storms. Morning light streamed through the guest room window, casting a gentle glow across Eli's sleeping form. Angela paused in the doorway, her nurse's eyes taking in details she'd missed in last night's darkness. The boy's frame was too thin for his age, his pajamas hanging loose on his small body. As he shifted in his sleep, the collar of his shirt slipped, revealing old scars that made her breath catch. Her heart ached at the sight. What had this child been through? She'd seen similar marks in the hospital, the kind that spoke of past trauma, of stories too painful to tell. When Eli stirred, Angela softened her voice. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" He sat up, his unseeing eyes turning toward her voice. "Yes, ma'am. Your bed is really soft." "I'm glad," she said, moving, "to help him up." "How about some breakfast? Then maybe you can help me with my morning chores." While Eli ate his oatmeal, Angela stepped onto her back porch with her phone. She dialed the sheriff's office, her fingers drumming against the porch railing as she waited. "Sheriff Hargrove speaking." The voice was gruff but familiar. She'd known Dale Hargrove since high school. "Dale, it's Angela Porter. I need to report a missing child, or rather, a found one. I picked up a young boy last night during the storm. He's blind, about 8 years old, name's Eli. His father's missing." There was a long pause. "Any idea where he came from?" "No. He just mentions his daddy riding with angels. Something about skulls. Could be a church group?" The sheriff's non-committal grunt spoke volumes. "Well, we'll look into it. Kind of stretched thin right now with storm damage, but we'll see what we can do." Angela frowned at his casual tone. "Dale, this is a child we're talking about. And he's safe with you for now, isn't he? Look, we'll check around, but without more to go on." After hanging up, Angela stood for a moment, letting her frustration settle. The morning air was fresh after the storm, carrying the familiar sounds of her small farm, including her chickens' impatient clucking. "Eli?" she called, returning inside. "Would you like to help me feed the chickens?" His face lit up. "Real chickens? I've never met any before." She guided him carefully across the yard to the chicken coop, describing each step. When they reached the fence, the sound of wings flapping made him gasp in delight. "They're saying good morning," Angela explained, placing some feed in his hands. "Here, hold your hands flat. They'll eat right from them." Eli giggled as the chickens pecked gently at his palms. "Their beaks tickle, and their wings, they sound like angels." Angela watched him, noting how naturally he adapted despite his blindness. "Eli, honey, how long have you been blind?" His smile faded slightly. "Since the fire," he said quietly. "I don't remember much. Just smoke, and Daddy carrying me out." "The fire?" she prompted gently. But Eli's expression had gone distant, his memories seeming to slip away like morning mist. I can't remember right now." Angela didn't push. Instead, she helped him finish feeding the chickens and led him back inside for lunch. Later that afternoon, she drove to Nashville to visit her daughter, Tracy. The social worker's office was cluttered but organized, much like Tracy herself. Her daughter looked up from her computer, her expression a mix of concern and exasperation. "Mom, you can't just keep a strange child in your house," Tracy said after Angela explained the situation. "What if his father's looking for him? What if there's a reason he was out there alone?" "That's exactly why I'm here," Angela replied. "I need your help finding out who he belongs to." Tracy leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "Mom, I know you mean well, but this isn't like taking in a stray cat. There are procedures, protocols, and after Dad..." She paused, softening her tone. I just don't want to see you get too attached. You don't even know who he belongs to. I'm just helping until his father is found, Angela insisted. Would you rather I'd left him in the rain? Of course not, Tracy sighed. I'll make some calls, check the missing persons database. But promise me you'll be careful. The drive home gave Angela time to think. Tracy's warnings echoed in her mind, but so did the image of Eli's scars, his gentle spirit despite whatever hardships he'd faced. When she walked through her front door, she heard something that stopped her in her tracks. Eli sat in the living room, humming a familiar hymn. Amazing Grace, the very song she used to sing to James during his final days. The melody wrapped around her heart like an old friend's embrace. How many nights had she sung those words, holding James's hand as cancer slowly took him? And now, here was this blind child, filling her home with the same sacred notes. She must have made a sound, because Eli turned toward her. Miss Angela? Is that you? Yes, sweetheart, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. That's a beautiful song you're singing. My mama used to sing it to me, he said softly, before she went to heaven. Angela sat beside him on the couch, letting the shared grief and comfort of the moment wash over them both. Later, as she tucked him into bed, she found herself whispering, You're safe here, honey. Just then, a motorcycle engine growled somewhere in the distance. Angela moved to the window, but the sound faded into the night before she could catch sight of its source. She stood there for a moment longer, watching the darkness, while behind her, Eli's steady breathing filled the quiet room with peace. 3 quiet days settled into a gentle rhythm at Angela Porter's farmhouse. The morning sun would barely peek through the curtains when Eli would wake, his sensitive ears already tuned to the sounds of Angela preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Good morning, Miss Angela, he'd call out, carefully making his way down the hallway, one hand trailing the wall. His confidence grew with each passing day as he mapped the layout of her home in his mind. Morning, sunshine, Angela would reply, marveling at how quickly he was adapting. She'd guide his hands to show him where everything was on the table. Plate at 12 o'clock, fork on the left, glass of juice at 2 o'clock. He learned fast, eager to be independent. After breakfast on the 3rd day, Angela folded laundry in the living room while Eli sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. His small fingers explored each item she handed him, identifying them by texture. This one's soft and bumpy, he said, running his hands over a washcloth. That's right, Angela praised. Can you fold it in half for me? His face scrunched in concentration as he carefully matched the corners. Like this? Perfect, she said, watching him beam with pride. Every evening, they'd settle into the worn armchair by the window, Angela's Bible open in her lap. Eli would rest his head against her shoulder as she read from Psalms, his fingers sometimes tracing the raised letters on the page. The Lord is my shepherd, Angela read softly. I shall not want... What does want mean here? Eli asked. It means we don't need to worry, she explained. God will take care of us. But worry had begun to creep in, despite her faith. She noticed the change in town first at the grocery store, where Mrs. Henderson, who'd waved to her every Sunday for 15 years, suddenly became very interested in examining produce when Angela passed by. At church, whispers followed her down the aisle. That's her, the one keeping that white boy, someone murmured. Ought to be ashamed. Angela held her head high, though her heart ached. She'd lived in Willow Creek most of her life, nursed half these people's babies, sat with their dying parents. Now they looked at her like a stranger. The diner was worse. Angela stopped in for coffee one afternoon while Eli was napping. Mrs. Johnson from next door watching him. Betty, who'd served her countless meals over the years, motioned her to the counter with worried eyes. "Angela," Betty whispered, glancing around nervously. "There were some men in here earlier. Rough types, on motorcycles. They were asking about a blind kid." Angela's coffee turned bitter in her mouth. What did they want to know? If anyone had seen him. Said they were family friends, but… Betty shook her head. They didn't look like anybody's friends, if you know what I mean. That night, for the first time since James died, Angela double-checked every lock in the house. She drew the curtains tight, jumping at every distant engine sound. Sheriff Dale Hargrove's cruiser pulled up the next morning. He stood awkwardly on her porch, hat in hands. "Miss Porter," he began, "we've checked every missing persons report in 3 states. No matches for a blind boy his age." Angela's heart tightened. Someone must be looking for him. Maybe. The sheriff shifted his weight. But sometimes people don't want to be found. He glanced over his shoulder before adding quietly, "You be careful, Angela. Some people don't like outsiders meddling." "I'm not an outsider," she replied firmly. "I've lived here 30 years. His expression was sympathetic, but worried. "You know what I mean." After he left, Angela sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. The sheriff's warning echoed in her mind, along with Betty's words about the mysterious men. A sound pulled her from her thoughts around midnight, soft footsteps in the hallway. She found Eli walking slowly, his eyes open but unseeing even more than usual. "Mama?" he whispered. "Mama, where are you?" Angela's heart broke. She gathered him gently in her arms, feeling him tremble. "Shh, honey. You're okay. You're safe." She carried him to the rocking chair, the same one where she'd nursed Tracy, where she'd held James in his final days. Back and forth she rocked, humming softly as Eli slowly calmed. "I miss her," he murmured against her shoulder. "I know, baby. I know." She held him until dawn painted the sky pink, her arms aching but unwilling to let go. In those quiet hours, as birds began their morning songs and dew settled on the grass outside, Angela made a silent vow. Whatever came, whoever these men were, she would protect this child. God had led him to her door for a reason, and she would not fail him. Eli finally settled into real sleep as sunrise warmed the windows. Angela looked down at his peaceful face, remembering James's words during their last conversation. God never closes one door without opening another. Maybe this was her open door, not just to help this child, but to find her own path forward. "I've got you," she whispered, brushing Eli's hair back from his forehead. "And I'm not letting go." The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the floor. Angela remained in the rocking chair, her arms sure and steady around Eli's sleeping form, ready to face whatever the new day might bring. The peaceful rhythm Angela and Eli had found shattered on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. They were in the garden, Eli's small hands carefully feeling the fuzzy leaves of Angela's tomato plants, when the first distant rumble reached them. "What's that sound?" Eli's head lifted, face bright with recognition. Angela froze. The growl grew louder, not thunder this time, but the unmistakable roar of motorcycles. Before she could react, Eli was already moving, his face lit with joy. "Daddy!" he called out, running with surprising speed toward the sound. His foot caught on a garden stake, but he kept going, hands outstretched. "Daddy's here!" "Eli, stop!" Angela's heart leapt into her throat as she scrambled after him. "Wait, baby!" 2 massive Harley-Davidson motorcycles thundered up her dirt driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. Their riders were large men, dressed in worn leather vests emblazoned with skull patches and the words, "Hell's Angels, Southern Chapter," in bold lettering. Angela caught up to Eli just as the bikes cut their engines, wrapping her arms around him protectively. The silence that followed felt thick with tension. "Well, well," the larger of the two men drawled, swinging off his bike. His vest was covered in patches, his arms in faded tattoos. "Looks like we found what we're looking for." The second man, shorter but broader, spat on the ground. "This the woman keeping Razor's kid?" Angela's arms tightened around Eli. "I found this child alone by the road in a storm. I've been caring for him until his family could be located properly." "That's real sweet," the first man sneered, taking a step forward. "But playtime's chum. Over, lady! Hand him over!" Eli squirmed in her arms. "Are they Daddy's friends? From the club?" "Stay behind me, honey," Angela said firmly, moving Eli back toward the house. To the bikers, she lifted her chin. "I don't know who you are, but you're not taking this child anywhere without proper authorities present." The shorter man laughed, an ugly sound. "Listen here. The proper authorities are right here," a familiar voice cut in. Sheriff Hargrove's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. He stepped out, one hand resting meaningfully on his holstered weapon. "Gentlemen, this is private property." The bikers exchanged looks. The taller one spoke first. "Just having a friendly conversation, Sheriff." "Uh-huh." Hargrove's weathered face was hard. "Well, conversation's over? Time for you boys to move along?" For a tense moment, Angela thought they might refuse. Then the shorter one shrugged. "Whatever you say, lawman. We'll be seeing you real soon, lady." The motorcycles roared to life again, their riders backing out onto the main road. Angela's legs felt weak with relief. "You okay?" Sheriff Hargrove asked, watching until the bikes disappeared. "Yes, thank you." Angela's voice shook slightly. "How did you know to come?" "Mrs. Johnson called. Said she saw suspicious bikes heading this way." He turned to her, expression grave. "Angela, those weren't ordinary bikers. That was Hell's Angels." "I saw their vests," she said quietly. "They're not people you want trouble with." He glanced at Eli, who was clinging to Angela's skirt. "Maybe it's time to consider—" "I'm not sending him to foster care," Angela cut in firmly. The sheriff sighed. "I'll increase patrols past your place, but be careful." That night, after a quiet dinner where Eli barely touched his food, Angela tucked him into bed. She had just turned out the light when his small voice stopped her. "They're Daddy's friends," he whispered. "From the club. I remember their voices." Angela sat heavily on the edge of his bed. "Your daddy. He's part of their group?" Eli nodded in the darkness. "He has a big motorcycle, too. It sounds like thunder." His lower lip trembled. "I miss him." "Oh, honey." Angela took his small hand in hers, feeling it tremble. "Want me to stay with you a while?" "Please?" She sat there holding his hand until long after he fell asleep, her mind racing. If Eli's father was a Hell's Angel, it explained so much. Why no missing persons report had been filed, why these men had come looking. But it also meant danger, not just for her, but for Eli. The next afternoon, Angela was folding laundry on the front porch while Eli played with his stuffed bear nearby. The sound of another motorcycle approached, but this one was different, slower, more deliberate. A single bike pulled up, its rider larger than the men from yesterday. He cut the engine and stood there for a long moment, just staring at them. He wore the same vest, but there was something different about him. An air of command, of barely contained emotion. Eli's head snapped up at the sound of boots on gravel. Before Angela could stop him, he was moving toward the stranger, one hand outstretched. The man didn't move, as Eli's small fingers found his leather vest, then moved up to touch his face. A rough beard, a strong jaw, features hard as granite, until Eli whispered one word. "Daddy?" The transformation was instant and heartbreaking. The man's fierce expression crumbled, his large hands trembling as they came up to cup Eli's face. "Hey, little man," he choked out, voice rough with emotion. "Daddy!" Eli threw himself forward, and the big man caught him, crushing him in an embrace that spoke of desperation and relief. Angela stood frozen on her porch, watching as the fearsome biker, Hank Razor Malone, held his son and wept openly, his face buried in Eli's hair. In that moment, she saw past the leather and tattoos to something achingly human. A father who had found his lost child. She watched them hold each other, their reunion both beautiful and terrifying. Because now she knew keeping Eli safe meant confronting not just a few rough bikers, but the entire Hell's Angels organization. And the man holding him now, this father whose love was evident in every tear, was their leader. The moment stretched on, filled with Eli's happy babbling and his father's broken responses. Angela remained where she was, her heart torn between joy at their reunion and fear of what might come next. The laundry basket sat forgotten at her feet, a reminder of the simple life she'd had just moments ago, before everything changed again. Angela's heart pounded as she watched the massive biker holding his son. She knew that name, Hank Razor Malone. Everyone in 3 counties knew it. Stories about him circulated in hushed whispers at church socials and late-night diner conversations. He was the leader of the Hell's Angels Southern chapter, a man whose very presence spelled trouble. Looking at him now, she could see why. His muscled arms were covered in intricate tattoos, burning skulls, twisted flames, and dark symbols she didn't understand. The leather vest he wore carried the sharp smell of gasoline and something else, something that made her nose wrinkle. Gunpowder. Suddenly, Razor's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto Angela. The tenderness he'd shown Eli vanished, replaced by a predatory glare that made her take an involuntary step back. "You took my boy?" His voice was low, dangerous. He stood up, keeping one hand on Eli's shoulder. "You kidnapped my son?" Angela's mouth went dry. "No, She saved me, Daddy." Eli's soft voice cut through the tension like a knife through butter. "I was lost in the rain. She found me and gave me soup and let me sleep in a warm bed." Something shifted in Razor's expression, subtle but unmistakable. The fury in his eyes dimmed, replaced by something that looked almost like shame. He cleared his throat roughly. "I thought," after he ran from the clubhouse. His voice cracked slightly. "Thought I'd lost him for good." Angela's nurse's instincts took over, pushing past her fear. "Why don't you both come inside? It's getting chilly out here." Razor hesitated, then nodded. He followed her into the house, ducking slightly to clear the doorframe. Inside, he looked oddly out of place among her quilted cushions and family photos. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the couch. "I'll make some coffee." While she busied herself in the kitchen, she could hear Eli chattering away to his father, telling him about feeding the chickens and helping with laundry. Razor's responses were quiet, but she could hear the emotion in them. When she returned with 3 mugs, coffee for the adults, hot chocolate for Eli, Razor was studying a photo on her side table. "Your family?" he asked gruffly. "My late husband," she said softly, "and our daughter Tracy." Something flickered across his face. "Lost someone too," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "Jenna, Eli's mama, 2 years ago now." "The motorcycle crash," Angela said without thinking. His head snapped up. How'd you know? Eli mentioned a crash. I'm so sorry. Razor's hand tightened on his mug. Yeah. Well. He cleared his throat. Been just me and the little man since then. Trying my best, but... He looked at Eli, who was happily sipping his hot chocolate. Sometimes my best ain't good enough. Before Angela could respond, a knock at the door made them all jump. Sheriff Hargrove stood there, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Ma'am, Malone. He nodded to each of them. Heard you were here. We need to talk about some paperwork. The next hour was tense as they discussed custody arrangements. The sheriff insisted on temporary custody checks, given the unusual circumstances. Razor bristled at first, but when Angela suggested he could visit Eli daily while things were sorted out, he calmed down. Just until we get everything straight, the sheriff said. Make sure everything's proper and legal. Fine, Razor growled, but I'm staying in town. After the sheriff left, an awkward silence fell. Eli broke it by asking, Can Daddy stay for dinner? Angela looked at Razor, who seemed ready to refuse, but something in Eli's hopeful expression made her say, Of course he can. She made a simple meal, chicken, potatoes, green beans. Razor ate silently, his eyes darting between his son and Angela. Eli chatted happily about his days at Angela's house, completely oblivious to the tension between the adults. Watching them, Angela felt her perspective shifting. The man across her table was still dangerous. She had no illusions about that. But there was something else there too. The way he cut up Eli's chicken without being asked. How he listened intently to every word his son said. The gentle way he wiped a smudge of gravy from Eli's chin. These weren't the actions of the monster from town gossip. They were the actions of a father who loved his son. A man who, perhaps, had more layers than she'd imagined. As she cleared the plates, she heard Eli laugh at something his father had said. A pure, joyful sound that filled the kitchen. She turned to see Razor smiling, really smiling, at his son. The expression transformed his hard features, showing glimpses of the man he might have been in another life. Grace, she thought suddenly. That's what she was seeing. Little sparks of grace in a man she'd been certain had none. It reminded her of something her late husband used to say. The Lord works in mysterious ways, Angela. Sometimes his light shines brightest in the darkest places. Looking at Razor Malone, feared leader of the Hell's Angels, covered in tattoos and leather, playing gentle hand games with his blind son at her kitchen table, she couldn't help but think how right that was. The next morning, Razor pulled his motorcycle up to the Sunset Trailer Park on the outskirts of Willow Creek. The manager, a thin man with suspicious eyes, kept glancing at Razor's vest while processing the rental agreement. It's just temporary, Razor muttered, pushing a wad of cash across the counter. Need to be close to my boy. The trailer wasn't much, faded blue paint and rusty steps, but it was only 5 minutes from Angela's house. He could be there quick if Eli needed him. The thought surprised him. He'd never worried about response times before. At 6:30 the next morning, he rode his Harley down Angela's gravel driveway, the engine purposely quieted. Eli was already on the porch, face turned toward the sound, grinning. Daddy, you came. Course I did, little man. Razor helped him down the steps. Miss Angela says you feed these chickens every morning? Angela appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. Good morning, Mr. Malone. Coffee's ready if you'd like some. He nodded awkwardly, still not used to such simple kindness. Together they walked to the chicken coop, Eli's hand tight in his. The boy knew exactly where to find the feed bucket. Gotta scatter it wide, Eli explained seriously, so everybody gets some. Razor watched his son's careful movements, the way he listened for the chickens clucking to know where to throw the feed. Pride and pain twisted in his chest. "Your porch rail's loose," he said to Angela, needing to look away. "Oh, yes. Been meaning to fix that." "I could, if you want," he shrugged. "Got my tools on the bike." Angela smiled. "That would be wonderful, thank you." The morning passed quietly. Razor worked on the rail while Eli sat nearby, asking questions about each tool, wanting to touch them all. Angela brought out lemonade and cookies, homemade and still warm. "Careful with those tools, Eli," she said gently. "They're sharp." "Like Daddy?" Eli asked innocently. Razor's hammer paused mid-swing, but Angela just laughed softly. "Well, your daddy's using those sharp tools to help fix things. That's what matters." The words hit him harder than any punch he'd ever taken. This became their routine. Each morning, Razor would arrive just as the sun was rising. They'd feed the chickens, then he'd work on whatever needed fixing while Eli helped. Angela would bring out snacks and sometimes join them, telling stories that made Eli laugh. But not everyone appreciated their arrangement. One morning, a group of church ladies arrived for what they called their prayer circle. Their whispers carried across the yard to where Razor was replacing rotted boards on the shed. "It ain't right, Angela, having that man around. Mary Beth's husband says he's killed people. A snake don't turn into a dove overnight." Razor gripped his hammer tighter, waiting for Angela's response. Her voice, when it came, was firm but kind. "Judge not, lest ye be judged. That's what the good book says." "But Angela, that man is trying to be a better father to his son. If we truly believe in redemption, we need to make room for it to happen." The ladies left shortly after, their disapproval hanging in the air. Razor kept working, unable to look at Angela when she brought him lunch. "Don't let them bother you," she said quietly. "They ain't wrong though, are they?" His voice was rough. "About what I've done? The past is the past. What matters is what you're choosing now." That Sunday, Angela invited him to church. The words clearly cost her something. She knew what people would say. "Thanks," he said gruffly, "but I ain't exactly welcome there." "God welcomes everyone." "Yeah, well, he might. His people are another story." But that Sunday morning, after dropping Eli off with Angela, Razor rode to the little white church. He parked his Harley in the far corner of the lot, away from the shiny sedans and minivans. Lighting a cigarette, he leaned against his bike and listened. The choir's voices filtered through the walls, familiar hymns his mama used to sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. He closed his eyes, remembering her voice, remembering when he used to believe in things like grace. Later that night, after Angela had served them all dinner, something she now did every evening, Eli sat in Razor's lap on Angela's porch swing. "Miss Angela says even bad men can shine again," Eli said suddenly, his small hand patting Razor's cheek. "Like in the Bible stories she reads me." Razor couldn't speak. His throat felt too tight, his eyes burning. He held his son closer, fighting tears he hadn't let fall in years. Angela appeared in the doorway but didn't speak. She just watched them quietly, her eyes gentle. The porch light cast a soft glow around them all, and for a moment, just a moment, Razor felt something he hadn't felt since Jenna died. Peace. The crickets chirped in the darkness, and the porch swing creaked softly as they rocked. Eli's breathing grew steady as he drifted to sleep in his father's arms. Still, Razor couldn't bring himself to move, to break this moment of grace he didn't deserve, but desperately needed. Angela spread the textured dots across the kitchen table, running her fingers over each raised pattern. "This is how blind people read, Eli. Each pattern of dots represents a different letter. Eli's small fingers explored the braille sheet eagerly. It's like tiny bumps telling stories. Exactly, Angela smiled, guiding his hand. This is A, 1 dot in the top corner. From his spot by the woodworking bench they'd set up in Angela's sunroom, Razor watched them. His rough hands carefully carved another wooden block, trying to match the exact spacing Angela had shown him for the braille letters. How's this one? He brought over his latest attempt, a block with E carved into one side and its corresponding braille pattern on the other. Eli's fingers found the dots. It feels right, Daddy, like Miss Angela's paper. Pride flickered across Razor's face as he returned to his work. The morning sun caught his movements as he bent over the workbench, causing his worn t-shirt to ride up slightly. Angela's trained nurse's eye caught sight of something concerning: angry red marks and old scarring across his lower back, with what appeared to be a recently reopened wound. Hank, she said quietly, using his real name. That wound needs attention. He tugged his shirt down quickly. It's nothing. It's infected. Let me help. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded gruffly. Angela sent Eli to practice his letters on the porch swing while she retrieved her first aid kit. This might sting, she warned, cleaning the wound. Old burn marks and deep scars crisscrossed his back like a road map of pain. Her gentle hands worked efficiently, but her heart ached at the evidence of so much suffering. Who hurt you, Hank? She asked softly. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he muttered, Life. Angela applied the bandage in silence, understanding that some hurts went deeper than skin. When she finished, he pulled his shirt back down and returned to his carving, but something had shifted between them. Over the next few days, their friendship grew in small moments. Angela noticed Razor started arriving earlier each morning, already having made coffee when she came downstairs. She found herself saving him plates from dinner, learning he liked her peach cobbler best. They worked together teaching Eli, their hands sometimes brushing as they guided his fingers over the braille patterns. One evening, after Eli had gone to bed, they sat on the porch steps. The night was heavy with humidity and unspoken words. I killed her, Razor said suddenly, his voice raw. Jenna, it was my fault. Angela waited, letting him find the words. I was drunk. Shouldn't have been riding, but I was too proud to let her drive. His hands clenched. Hit a curve too fast. She flew off. I can still hear her scream. Tears fell freely now, dropping onto his tattooed knuckles. I killed the woman I loved, the mother of my boy. What kind of man does that make me? Angela didn't offer empty platitudes or religious quotes. Instead, she said simply, Then make her death mean something. He looked at her, confusion mixing with pain. Honor her memory by being the man she saw in you, Angela continued. The father Eli needs. It won't bring her back, but it might help heal what's broken. Later that night, unable to sleep, Angela passed by Eli's room and heard him praying. Dear Jesus, please help Daddy's heart not hurt so much. Miss Angela says you can fix broken things, and Daddy's heart is real broken since Mommy went to heaven. Could you maybe send some angels to help? The nice kind, not the scary ones Daddy used to ride with. Amen? Angela wiped tears from her eyes, touched by the pure faith of a child's prayer. The next morning she woke to the sound of hammering. Razor was already on her porch, tools spread around him as he worked on what looked like a birdhouse. Eli likes hearing the birds, he explained, not meeting her eyes. His breath was clean, no trace of alcohol. Thought maybe if they had a home closer to his window? Angela smiled, noting how his careful measurements matched the precision he'd used with the braille blocks. That's a wonderful idea. They worked together that morning, Angela holding boards while Razor nailed them in place. Eli sat nearby, running his fingers over his wooden letters and listening to the construction sounds. "Daddy, are you building something good?" Eli asked. "Trying to, son." Razor's voice was gruff but gentle. "Trying to build something good." The morning sun grew stronger, warming the porch as they worked. Angela noticed how Razor's movements seemed lighter, less burdened. The birdhouse took shape under his hands. Not just a simple box, but something beautiful, with intricate details carved into the wood. "Jenna loved birds," he said quietly as he worked on the roof. "Used to say they were like little pieces of heaven come down to earth." Angela touched his shoulder gently. "She'd be proud of this." His hands stilled for a moment. "You think so?" "I know so." Eli came over, feeling the smooth wood with careful fingers. "It feels pretty, Daddy." "Want to help me paint it?" Razor asked. "I'll guide your hands." Eli's face lit up. "Can we make it blue? Mommy always said blue was the color of hope." "Blue it is, then," Razor agreed, his voice thick with emotion. They spent the rest of the morning painting, Razor's big hands covering Eli's small ones as they worked. Angela watched them, her heart full. This wasn't the kind of healing that happened overnight, but it was healing nonetheless, one small act of grace at a time. The birdhouse seemed to represent something more than just a home for birds. It was a symbol of new beginnings, of broken things being made beautiful again. As they worked, a family of cardinals swooped through the yard, their red feathers bright against the morning sky. Eli clapped his hands at the sound of their songs. "The birds are already saying thank you." Razor smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Maybe they are, son. Maybe they are." The weeks flowed like honey, sweet and slow. Summer settled over Willow Creek, bringing with it long evenings filled with fireflies and the gentle rhythm of life finding its new pattern. Angela watched as Razor, or Hank, as she'd begun to think of him, took tentative steps toward change. Every Wednesday evening, he would arrive at her house precisely at 6:45, dressed in clean jeans and a pressed shirt, his leather vest notably absent. Together they would walk to the church basement for Bible study. The first time he came, the silence was deafening. Mrs. Henderson clutched her purse closer, and old Mr. Peters actually moved his chair away. But Razor didn't seem to notice. He sat quietly, his large frame somehow smaller in humility, following along in the borrowed Bible Angela had given him. When asked to read a verse, his voice was rough but earnest, stumbling over the ancient words with determination. "Love your enemies," he read one evening, "and pray for those who persecute you." His fingers traced the words, as if trying to absorb their meaning through touch. During the days, Razor kept busy. Word spread about his skill with engines, and soon people began appearing at his trailer with broken-down trucks and tractors. At first, they would leave the keys in the mailbox, unwilling to deal with him directly. But as vehicles came back running better than new, attitudes slowly shifted. Mr. Johnson, whose ancient Ford hadn't run right in years, actually shook Razor's hand after he fixed it. "Never heard her purr like that before," he admitted, reaching for his wallet. But Razor waved the money away. "Just trying to make things right," he said simply. He fixed Sarah Wilson's fence after a storm knocked it down, spending hours in the hot sun setting new posts. When she tried to thank him with a pie, he directed her to the church's food bank instead. "Others need it more," he said. Angela watched these small acts of redemption with quiet joy. Each one was like a stitch, slowly mending the torn fabric between Razor and the community. Even the congregation began to thaw, though some still held their reservations. One particularly beautiful evening, the church was hosting a special service. Angela sat in her usual pew, her heart full as Eli stood at the front. He wore his Sunday best, his small hands gripping the microphone stand for balance. The piano began the familiar notes of Amazing Grace, and Eli's voice rose, clear and pure as morning light. His unseeing eyes were lifted upward, and though his voice trembled slightly on the high notes, there was something in his singing that touched every heart in the room. Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. At the back of the church, Razor stood like a statue, his hands gripped tightly together. Tears tracked down, his face unashamed. As Eli sang about being lost and found, blind but now seeing, the parallels were impossible to miss. When the last note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Eli stood uncertain until he heard his father's heavy footsteps coming up the aisle. Razor gathered his son in his arms, holding him close as if he were the most precious thing in the world. "That was beautiful, son," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Your mama would be so proud." The congregation sat in respectful silence, witnessing this moment of pure love between father and son. Even Mrs. Henderson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Later that evening, Angela sat on her porch swing, listening to the nighttime chorus of crickets and frogs. The air was sweet with jasmine, and stars sparkled overhead like scattered diamonds. Razor sat in the rocking chair nearby, while Eli lay on a blanket on the grass, already half asleep. Angela poured sweet tea into mason jars, the ice cubes clinking musically. The drink was cool and refreshing, perfect for a summer night. "You know," Razor said after a while, his voice thoughtful, "if someone had told me a few months ago that a churchwoman would save my soul, I'd have laughed in their face." He shook his head, wondering at the strange paths life could take. Angela smiled, watching the fireflies dance in the darkness. "It's not me saving you, Hank," she said softly. "It's love." He considered this, rocking slowly. "Maybe that's the same thing," he finally said. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to Eli's soft breathing mixing with the night sounds. The porch swing creaked gently, a counterpoint to Razor's rocking chair. It was peaceful, in a way Angela hadn't experienced since before her husband passed. She realized with a start that the hollow ache of loneliness that had been her constant companion these past years had eased. Her home, once so quiet it echoed with memories, now rang with Eli's laughter and the sound of Razor's deep voice reading Bible stories. Even the spaces between the sounds felt different, warmer, more alive. The sweet tea was cool and perfect. The night air was soft with summer's breath. And here, in this moment, Grace felt as tangible as the stars above. 3 broken people, brought together by circumstance and kept together by something deeper, finding healing in each other's company. This was what redemption looked like, Angela thought. Not a sudden lightning strike of change, but a slow, steady transformation, like dawn breaking over the horizon, turning darkness into light 1 degree at a time. Eli stirred on his blanket, mumbling something about angels in his sleep. Razor rose quietly, gathering his son in his arms with infinite tenderness. The little boy snuggled into his father's chest, secure in the knowledge that he was loved and protected. "Thank you," Razor said simply, looking at Angela. In those 2 words were volumes of gratitude, for taking in his son, for showing him a different path, for believing in the possibility of change when everyone else had written him off. Angela nodded, understanding all that went unsaid. This was what faith looked like in action. Not judgment, but love. Not condemnation, but grace. As she watched father and son walk home through the starlit yard, She sent up a quiet prayer of gratitude for the mysterious ways God worked to heal broken hearts and restore lost souls. The night wrapped around them like a blessing, full of promise and peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, this moment was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The peace they'd found shattered like glass on a summer afternoon. The rumble started as a distant thunder, growing louder until 5 motorcycles roared down Angela's dirt driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. Razor stood from where he'd been working on Angela's garden, his face going hard as stone. "Get Eli inside," he said quietly to Angela. "Now." Angela hurried the boy through the screen door just as the bikes circled the yard like hungry wolves, their engines cut off in unison, leaving an ominous silence. The riders were massive men, their leather vests adorned with patches marking them as Hell's Angels. Their leader, a man with a gray beard and cold eyes, stepped forward. "Well, well, look what we found. Our brother playing house with a church lady." His voice dripped with mockery. "You gone soft, Razor?" Razor stood his ground. "What do you want, Snake?" "We want our road captain back. Brotherhood means something. Or did you forget that while you were playing daddy and holding hands with Jesus?" Angela watched through the window as Razor's fists clenched. She could see the struggle in him, the pull of his old life against everything he'd built here. Snake moved closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that still carried across the yard. "Here's the deal. You come back to the fold, or the lady's house gets lit up. Maybe with her inside, maybe not. Your choice." Eli gripped Angela's hand. "What's happening?" he whispered. "Just some men talking to your daddy," she said softly, but her heart was racing. That evening, after the bikers rode away, Razor paced Angela's kitchen like a caged animal. "I have to go," he said. "They'll hurt you both if I don't." "Running is what broke you before," Angela said firmly. "After Jenna died, you ran from your pain into their world. Look where that got you." Razor slammed his palm against the wall. "You don't understand what they're capable of." "Then help me understand," she said quietly. "But don't you dare leave your son again." They went to Sheriff Hargrove's office as night fell. The sheriff listened gravely to their story, his weathered face growing darker with each detail. "I can post deputies," he said finally, "but these men, they're not afraid of the law." "We're not afraid either," Angela said, though her voice trembled slightly. "We have something, stronger than fear." That night, none of them could sleep. They sat in Angela's living room, Eli nestled between them on the couch. The boy's small hand found Razor's calloused one, then reached for Angela's. "Let's pray," he said simply. And so they did, their voices mixing in the darkness, Angela's steady faith, Razor's rough whispers, and Eli's clear, childlike trust. "Dear God, please keep us safe," Eli prayed, "and help the bad men find their way home like Daddy did." "I ain't scared," he added afterward. "You both keep me safe." Razor's grip tightened on his son's hand, and Angela saw tears glinting in the big man's eyes. But morning brought cruel reality. Angela stepped outside to find her truck's windows smashed, glass glittering in the dawn light like cruel diamonds. Across her front door, spray-painted in blood-red letters, was their message: "Angels don't forgive." She stood there, heart pounding, as Razor came up behind her. His face was a storm of guilt and rage. "This is my fault," he whispered. "All of it." Angela turned to him, her voice steady despite her fear. "No, this is what redemption costs sometimes, and we're going to face it together." The neon sign of the Broken Spoke Bar cast an angry red glow across the parking lot as Razor approached Tombstone. His old lieutenant lounged against a motorcycle, cigarette smoke curling around his face like devil's breath. "Come to beg, brother?" Tombstone sneered. "Leave Angela out of this," Razor said, his voice low but firm. "She's innocent. This is between us. Ain't nothing innocent about stealing one of ours." Tombstone flicked his cigarette away. "You gone soft preaching with that church lady." The first punch came without warning. Razor blocked it, but 3 more angels emerged from the shadows. Fists and boots found their marks. He fought back, landing solid hits, but they overwhelmed him with sheer numbers. "Remember who you really are," Tombstone spat, delivering a final kick that left Razor sprawled in the gravel. Hours later, Angela found him. Her gentle hands cleaned his wounds, stitched what needed stitching. When his eyes finally opened, they were filled with defeat. "Don't go back to them," she pleaded, pressing a cold compress against his swollen face. "They'll come for you next if I don't," he whispered hoarsely. Angela sat quietly for a long moment, then reached for her phone. Sheriff Hargrove answered on the second ring. They formed a plan. Razor would turn state's evidence, trading his testimony about the angel's crimes for witness protection, for Eli's safety. But before they could act, the rumble of motorcycles shattered the night. Headlights swept across Angela's yard like searchlights. The angels had come. Angela stood on her porch, clutching her worn Bible. The leather-clad figures approached, but she didn't flinch. The headlights blazed behind them, turning them into dark silhouettes against the glare. But Angela Porter stood her ground, faith stronger than fear. The sunset painted the sky in shades of crimson, casting long shadows across Angela's yard. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder as Razor stepped onto the gravel driveway, his hands raised to show he carried no weapons. His old brothers circled him like wolves, their leather vests gleaming in the dying light. Angela stood firm on her porch, one hand pressing Eli protectively behind her. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her voice remained steady as she watched the confrontation unfold. "This ends tonight," Razor called out, his voice carrying across the tense silence. "No more blood. Not here." Tombstone's laugh was cold as ice. "Always were soft for kids," he sneered, pulling a gun from his vest. The metal caught the red light, looking like it was already stained with blood. But before he could squeeze the trigger, Eli's clear voice rang out from behind Angela. "Daddy, I can hear your heart." The boy's words seemed to freeze time itself. The bikers shifted uneasily, looking between the blind child and their weapons. Something changed in Razor's stance. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in front of Tombstone's gun. "You want someone? Take me. Leave my boy out of it." The wail of police sirens pierced the evening air, growing closer with each second. Red and blue lights began to flash at the end of the driveway. Sheriff Hargrove's deputies poured out of their vehicles, weapons drawn. One by one, the bikers looked at each other, then at Eli's innocent face. Their weapons clattered to the ground. Angela pulled Eli close as Sheriff Hargrove approached Razor with handcuffs. As the metal closed around his wrists, Razor's eyes met Angela's. Despite everything, his expression held a peace she'd never seen before, as if some great burden had finally been lifted from his shoulders. The county jail's visiting room was quiet except for the soft rustle of pages turning. 2 months had passed since that fateful night, and Razor sat across from Angela, his prison uniform a stark contrast to his gentle smile. The tension that once lived in his shoulders had melted away, replaced by a calm acceptance. "Eli's doing real well with his therapy," Angela said, sliding a new book across the table. "He can navigate the whole house now without his cane." Razor's eyes lit up at the mention of his son. "That's my boy, strong as they come." The church raised another $1,000 last Sunday for his eye surgery, Angela continued, her voice warm with pride. Same folks who wouldn't look at us 6 months ago? Now they're baking casseroles and asking how they can help. In the evenings, Razor led a small group of inmates in Bible study. The guard said they'd never seen anything like it, a former Hell's Angel teaching about redemption. One good woman and a blind boy taught a devil about grace, he'd tell them, his voice rough with emotion. If God ain't given up on me, he ain't given up on any of you. Later that night, Angela sat in her favorite chair by the window. The distant rumble of motorcycles drifted through the evening air. But unlike before, her heart remained steady. Where fear once lived, peace had taken root. She smiled, knowing that sometimes God's greatest miracles came disguised as challenges. The day of Eli's surgery dawned bright and clear. Angela's heart raced as she sat beside his hospital bed, holding his small hand while the doctor carefully unwrapped the bandages. The room was hushed, filled with anticipation. Keep your eyes closed for a moment, the doctor instructed gently. Now very slowly open them. Eli's eyelids fluttered. I can see light, he shouted, tears streaming down his face. Miss Angela, I can see. When his gaze found her face for the first time, his smile grew even wider. You're even prettier than I thought, he whispered, reaching up to touch her cheek. They took dozens of photos, capturing every precious moment. Angela sent them to Razor in a special delivery package. His response came 3 days later, the paper wrinkled from what could only have been tears. Tell my boy his daddy finally sees too, he wrote in shaky handwriting. Really sees, for the first time in years. The town transformed along with Eli. Neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid Angela now stopped by with casseroles and apologies. When the social worker came to discuss Eli's future, Angela didn't hesitate to accept the role of foster guardian until Razor's release. Eli returned to school, his bright spirit touching everyone around him. Each afternoon, he'd bound through Angela's door, eager to share stories about his day and write letters to his father about all the wonderful things he could now see. Spring sunlight painted golden streaks across the church steps as the prison van pulled up to the curb. The whole town of Willow Creek seemed to hold its breath, watching from windows and sidewalks as Hank Razor Malone stepped out into the fresh morning air. His leather vest was folded neatly in his weathered hands, and though his tattoos still marked his arms, there was a different light in his eyes. Daddy, Eli's voice rang out across the churchyard. The 8-year-old broke free from Angela's gentle hold and ran forward, his recovered vision guiding him straight to his father's arms. Razor dropped to his knees, gathering his son close. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks as he held Eli, not caring who saw this softer side of him. Look at you, he whispered hoarsely. Really look at you. Angela approached them slowly, her own eyes misty. Welcome home, Hank, she said softly. That evening, their small house filled with the comforting smells of roast chicken and freshly baked cornbread, the same meal Angela had made the night she first found Eli. They gathered around her worn oak table, passing dishes and sharing gentle laughter. As night settled in, they talked about tomorrow. Razor spoke of his plans to open a repair shop in town, his eyes bright with purpose. And I want to start something new, he explained. A motorcycle club for veterans, folks in recovery, people who need a second chance like I got. Before bed, they joined hands in the living room, Angela, Razor, and Eli, bowing their heads in their first prayer together as a family. A year had passed, and Willow Creek was bursting with excitement as the Grace Riders Motorcycle Club hosted their first charity ride. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm breeze, announcing, "Riding for Sight, supporting blind children." The whole town had turned out, filling the streets with lawn chairs and picnic blankets. Eli, now 9 years old with clear vision, stood on Angela's wraparound porch, waving enthusiastically at the gathered crowd. His eyes sparkled with joy as he watched the motorcycles line up, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Razor pulled up beside the porch, his bike purring softly. The Grace Riders logo on his new leather vest showed a dove rising from flames. "Come ride with us, Miss Angela," he said with a grin, holding out a shiny black helmet. Angela laughed, shaking her head in disbelief at how far they'd come. She took the helmet and climbed on behind him, her heart light with joy. They rode through the Tennessee countryside, leading a parade of bikes past rolling green hills and flowering meadows. The wind whipped at her clothes as she reflected on their journey, from that stormy night when she found a lost boy to this moment of pure redemption. When they returned home, Eli was sitting cross-legged on the porch, strumming his guitar. Razor walked to the old wooden fence and, with quiet reverence, hung his old Hell's Angels vest on a post. Angela watched from the steps, her eyes filled with grateful tears. "Even from Hell's Road," she whispered, "Grace can find its way home. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day."